Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Marshall, co-founder and executive director of This Is My Brave, and welcome to episode 14, season 1 of BraveTV. We'd first like to thank the Alkermes Inspiration Grant COVID-19 Relief Fund for sponsoring BraveTV. Today's episode is geared towards men's mental health. Though June is officially Men's Mental Health Month, we want to highlight the Movember movement that has quickly risen to the occasion of men's mental health awareness during the month of November. According to the Movember website, men's health is in crisis. Men are dying on average 6 years earlier than women, and for largely preventable reasons. Unchecked, prostate cancer rates will double over the next 15 years. Globally, testicular cancer is the most common cancer among men aged 15 to 39. And this blew me away. I didn't know this stat, but across the world, one man dies by suicide every minute of the day, with males accounting for 75% of suicides. Because of This Is My Brave's focus on mental health, we have David Andrade with us today to address some of these factors. Not only does your mental health play into your physical health, but physical health conditions often coincide with mental well-being. In solidarity with the Movember movement, we are here to raise awareness about men's mental health and the realities around it. So let's jump in. So David, thank you so much for being with me today. I'm thrilled to get your story out to our community because you and I first talked a couple months ago, I think it was, because I'm going to let you share how you heard about This Is My Brave, but I was just blown away by your story.
Oh, well, Jennifer, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. So I heard about you guys through a flyer that they had sent out around my school about the This Is My Brave College Edition. And I applied for that, but then obviously COVID happened, and so that wasn't happening. And then they connected me with you, and they told me this might be a better avenue.
And share with everyone, give them kind of your short bio on like where you are right now, what you're doing, and then we'll dive back into the beginnings of your story.
Sure, I'd love to. So my name is David Andrade. I was born in Los Angeles, and I moved to Boston when I was an infant. And I'm currently finishing up my undergrad degree, and I'm applying to grad school, and I'm looking to pursue my master's in social work.
Amazing. And so share with me, I guess, the beginning of, because when we talked last, we talked about kind of your story from start to finish. And it really does take people through how mental health became a big, thing in your life. And so take me back to kind of the beginnings of mental health and how it affected your life.
Yeah, sure. So my relationship with trauma started even before I was born. So my mom actually suffered from domestic abuse. My dad actually hit her while she was pregnant with me, and she was actually forced into labor early. So I was actually born at 6.5 months and spent the first month and a half of my life in an incubator. And for what it was worth, like it was very difficult for my mom. I mean, just in general, that was a difficult situation, but it was hard for her because she had actually had a miscarriage before me. So it was one of those things where people around her were kind of trying to kind of warn her, like, this may not work out. But she was very, I give my mom all the credit in the world because she just loved me. She didn't believe that there was any way that I wouldn't make it. And I don't think I would have made it without that, right? Um, but as I grew up, as I said, my father was very abusive. And right before my first birthday, my mom had kind of had enough because my dad had actually like broken into our house, and he had actually taken custody of me forcibly. And it wasn't until like some family friends like talked to him, and they said, you have to give him back. As soon as my mom got me that night, she packed a bag, and her, my sister, and we all flew to Boston. And when we first got to Boston, I was like 11 months old, a little over 11 months old. And so we were bouncing between family members' houses, and then we moved into a shelter, and we were moving between like battered women's homes. And so it took us about a year and a half to finally get some stable housing. And once we did that, I mean, life didn't get too much easier after that. But I will say that as kind of time went on, we did struggle a lot, and so it was very difficult to kind of make it through. And one of the things was my mom, she didn't have her citizenship at the time. So when I went through some of the things that happened to me as a kid, when I actually tried to go talk to someone, like a therapist at school, my mom actually pulled me aside and told me, "Hey, don't tell them anything because they're gonna take you away." And so, from a very early age, I kind of had this idea that like therapy and like mental health, all of that was like kind of a ploy from like the system to like take me away from my mother. So it was one of those things where like mental health in general was just stigmatized in a way where like it was a dangerous thing and it was not to be trusted.
And where's your mom from again?
So my mom was born in Guatemala, and she lived there until she was about 30, and that's when she immigrated to the United States.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So yeah, tough thing when you might want to be, looking into care, and it can, in that situation, it's a scary thing. So then, take me more to your teenage years.
So when I was a teenager, I went to Boston Public Schools. Um, I did relatively well. I will say that I had some, my school wasn't necessarily the best school. I did have some excellent teachers, and then I had some that weren't so great. And so, but I did struggle a little bit in school, and eventually I actually ended up just dropping out, just because it didn't really feel like something that was kind of designed for me. And so after I dropped out, I had had a job. I was kind of like just running around. I was getting into like little trouble here and there. Luckily, nothing too big, but eventually, I actually ended up making my way back to community college because my mentor at the time had told me like, this is something that you want to pursue. And she was the one who kind of told me like college is just different from high school. Like you will actually learn things that you want to learn about. And the big thing that she told me was like at the time I had kind of like a dead end job. Like I was working at the New England Aquarium, and I mean it's a minimum wage job. I was working customer service, and I had really nowhere else to go. And she just kept telling me like, "You're so much smarter than this." And at the time, I actually met a friend of mine. His name was Anthony, and I really grew to love him. And he was actually going to school at Harvard at the time, and it meant a lot to me because he was a few years older than me, and he just always kept telling me how smart I was, and like telling me like, man, you're really sharp. Like, listen, like, don't let this be the end for you. Like, you got to keep going. Like, I know school doesn't seem like a great idea right now, but trust me, you're gonna really enjoy going back. And so, like, that gave me a lot of confidence hearing that from him.
That's awesome to have a mentor like that to really encourage you.
Yeah.
And so in school and community college, you studied, remind me.
Originally, I was studying criminal justice.
Mm.
I didn't know what I wanted to study. I think at first, I think I wanted to study like education, and then I didn't really like all the classes. So I had taken an intro to criminal justice, and I was like, oh wow, like I'm learning about my rights, and this is really awesome. And so I just remember like falling in love with the classes, and so I was just like, yeah, this is what I'm going to major in. And I had no idea what I was going to do with that degree. I just knew that I enjoyed it. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into that avenue.
And then where did the part in your story that when you and I talked last, where you were mentioning that you reached that point where you were doing some maybe unhealthy coping mechanisms, and then there was a turning point? Will you take us there?
Yeah. So even before that happened as a child, when I was a kid, I actually suffered from a lot of abuse growing up. And so the thing is, like, once my mom came here, she still dealt with men who would hit her, and like I just remember always like them locking themselves in a room, and you hear the slamming, and the things breaking, and the furniture rocking, and the screaming, and the yelling, and so it was something that I kind of got used to at home, was like this idea of like violence and not saying anything about it. And so like another thing that kind of happened to me was I was actually assaulted when I was a kid by multiple family members, and so that was something that I kind of had to keep to myself as well. just because I didn't feel like that was something that I could talk about. Growing up, I always heard these stories about how abusive my father was to my mom. And as a young kid, I knew that that was like I was smart enough to know like, oh, I have two parents, I'm half of each of them. And I always felt like I had like a part of that in me. And so like when you hear all these horrible stories about like the person who created you, you start to internalize it like, oh, I'm that horrible person. So I never really talked much about things that were going on with me. Like that was like the first thing. And like even as a kid, I remember like if something happened, I hurt myself and I would start to cry, and like everyone would tell me the same thing. Like, you know, men don't cry. Like you're like, don't do that. Or like you can't be sad. Like you have to be strong. You have to be like the man of the house, which it doesn't really make sense when you're like 8 years old to kind of put that pressure on a child. Like a child is a child. But I think that so all of those things kind of like started to manifest, and I started to develop these tendencies where I wouldn't want to talk to anyone. I would just kind of internalize all of the things, and so as I got older, I started to progress through community college. Things started going well, and I had some mishaps with community college with financial aid and stuff. So it took me a lot longer to graduate. But once I finally did, I actually moved to Chicago for a couple of years. And when I was in Chicago, I want to say a few months after I got out there, I was talking to my friend Anthony, who was having a hard time at home with his wife. They were actually in the process of getting divorced, and he had lost his job. And I was trying to convince him to come out to visit me. And I told him, I was like, hey, if you come out, I made some great contacts here. Like I can help find you a job. Like I'll fly you out. You can stay with me for as long as you need to, and we'll get things settled for you. He said, yeah, that sounds good. Like we'll book the ticket and everything. And then 2 days later, I saw on Facebook that he had actually committed suicide. Mm. And so for me, that was just really difficult to handle. And I had never lost a friend to suicide before. I had friends who had passed away to gun violence, to car accidents, you know, like different situations. And like that almost always made more sense to me. But when it came to suicide, especially because Anthony just was so happy and he was just such a loving guy and he meant so much to me, I didn't realize like how much he was hurting. And it was kind of a difficult thing for me to process. And so at that point, like I said, I mean, I wasn't one to talk about the issues that were going on, and I just started drinking more and more often.
So David, what year was that?
Ooh, I want to say it was about 5 years ago now.
So you turned to alcohol to cope, to numb, probably because it was so painful. Yeah. And then what? There was that turning point. Then what happened?
So I started to spiral out slowly. So I want to say maybe like, I want to say a little over a year after he passed away, I just quit my job. And I don't know if that was necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I think now in the long run, it ended up being a good thing. Just because like I had told myself, like I kind of hated my job at the time. And I said, I'm never going to take another job unless I love what I'm doing or if I get some kind of benefit from it. And so I ended up quitting my job. But again, like even though I quit my job, I was drinking early. And I mean, I was drinking so much that like I would go to Costco and buy alcohol on discount because I just knew that like I was going to go through it so quickly. And like I would start early in the day. And I mean, I would drink so much and nobody even knew I was drunk, right? Like I was just such a very functional alcoholic. And so, I mean, and that went on for a couple of years. And then after that, I ended up moving back to Boston because my mom was having some medical issues. So I had to come and help take care of her. And so that's, at that point, I also started, experimenting more with drugs, just trying different things. But again, like I really just kind of lead into the alcohol. And even when I got back, I was just drinking. I would find little jobs here and there. And I actually ended up working at a nonprofit that I really loved. And I mean, I was really good at my job. Like I was working with teens. I was helping them get really excited about writing, and we would help them with college prep. And it was it was kind of a dream come true because I've always wanted to be able to give back to my community in a way where like I could help other kids who may have been had a tough upbringing and help them kind of find their way. And so I had this like almost like a dream job, I would say, where I was like, I really loved going to work. And eventually it got to the point where they kind of talked to me and they're like, hey, we think that you have a problem with alcohol, like, because we can smell it on you. And the funny thing was I had actually like cut back once I started working there, but it was still like not enough. And eventually they just told me that they had to let me go. And I think that that's when I finally had hit rock bottom, because I remember thinking to myself, like, this was an incredible opportunity. This was like the first time where I was helping people and I was really happy again. And I blew it. And luckily for me, while I was at that job, I ran into an old friend of mine who I like went to elementary and like middle school with. And it was funny because he was like kind of a hard guy, you know. He was just like a very like, you know, I don't want to say like a tough guy, but like everybody knows he's a stand-up guy, right? And I remember talking to him one day and I was telling him about something that I was like really upset about. And he was like, yeah, man, you know, like I get really upset too, and sometimes I get really pissed off. But like my therapist, who's really been helping me with learning to manage my emotions, and I just remember thinking like, wait, what? Like you have a therapist? Like who does that? And who admits to that? Like, and it was funny because I've always had respect for him, and so when he mentioned that to me, it did take away a lot of the stigma, because I was like, well, if he's doing it, then like there has to be something cool, right? And after I got let go, I remember I like called him crying and I was just like, hey man, like I know you told me you could hook me up with your therapist, like do you think you could still introduce me? And he was like, yeah, let me talk to him and I'll connect you guys. And then when he connected us, the first thing he told me was like, hey David, when you go talk to him, you have to be honest.
Yeah.
He's like, it's not going to work unless you're completely honest about what's going on. He's like, if you just go in, you just show up and you just kind of like, do it halfway, like you're not going to get what you really need out of it. And I mean, even in my first session with my therapist, I didn't know if it was going to work. I remember thinking like, oh, he's a nice guy. But I was like, I don't think this is going to do anything for me. Um, but yeah, now like 2 years later, I like love my therapist. He's like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
You took that advice and you do the work, and it's truly made a difference in your life, and you can tell. I mean, then it led you to where you are now.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about like why you wanted to get into the field.
So the big thing was I saw the change that it made in my life. So I mean, before this, I would get up at night at whatever time, and I would start drinking, and I would go out on about my day and figure out what I was doing. And I would just keep drinking throughout the day. I'd go out at night and meet up with some random girl and we'd have a long night. And like, I wasn't sleeping at all. I wasn't doing anything productive with my life. I had said that I was going to go to school, but I never really thought about it. And more importantly, I think that like, I just had an issue with my self-esteem. I had an issue with my confidence, and I just had a lack of vision for the future. I had a very nihilistic point of view. And to me, I just remember thinking like, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, then that's okay. It was almost like if I don't wake up tomorrow, like that's best case scenario. And I remember times where I woke up and I was just like, all right, I gotta do this another day, right? And I really started to see how that impacted the people around me and the people that I cared about. And I started to notice that like this is hurting them. And it's hurting them that I'm in pain. And I'm not okay, and I'm willing to admit that to myself now. And I think that it wasn't until like I lost something that I really like started to care about that I realized I needed to fix this. Because I mean, I had dated a lot of women during that time in my life, and there was this one common theme that they all said to me, and they're like, "You don't care about anything. You don't even care about yourself." And it hurt to hear that over and over, especially like because it was very clear to them. Like, it wasn't like I mentioned it to one person and then like they kind of kept repeating it. It was like, no, they all came up to this conclusion on their own. And so like you just start to realize like, oh, well, maybe this isn't just a coincidence. This is something that's real.
And what would you say like to someone who's considering, I might want to try and work on myself. I might want to give therapy a shot. Like what's your piece of advice for making that reach out for help?
Oh, well, so I think that the first thing that they need to realize is that the same thing that my friend told me is, if you're going to do this and you're going to like, you got to really lean into it and you got to be honest about everything. And obviously like, you're not going to, you're going to have to build a rapport with your therapist. And for what it's worth, like, the first therapist you find may not be the one for you, right? It's funny. I try to convince all my friends to go to therapy now, and I tell them it's a little bit like dating, right? Like,
I've heard that before.
yeah, sometimes you just hit it off the bat, and like, this is your person, and like, you're gonna love them, and you're gonna move forward, and it's gonna be great. And sometimes it's gonna take a little work, right? Like, you might take a few sessions before you really start to open up and find someone and find like that comfort level. And sometimes you'll go, and after a session, you're gonna say, nope, this isn't it, right? And you kind of gotta move on. But I would say that like, it's worth a shot, just because like, if it works for you, then you're going to realize that you wish you would have done it sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing I told myself was like, all right, even if this doesn't work, I can at least say I tried and I'm right back where I started. But I would say that if you're thinking about it, just follow through, just take it one step at a time, and understand that it's a journey, and it's not going to happen overnight. Like, you're not going to go to 1 or 2 sessions and then you're cured. Like, no, I think for me, this is a lifelong process. And like, I want to continue to kind of learn and grow, and to continue to learn to love myself. Because that's really like the one thing that I've like, that has been drilled in me, is that this is like about me. And like, I originally came in having issues with like intimacy with like the people that I was dating. And like, the first thing that my therapist told me was like, listen, if you can't love yourself, there's no way that you can love anyone else, and no one can love you back to like full health, right? Like, you have to do that for yourself. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice. And don't listen to what other people say about therapy. Like, it doesn't matter if they think that like you're crazy or whatever, because ultimately, when you're feeling happy and you're feeling healthy and you're just like moving to a better place in your life, you're going to realize that like, none of that matters.
So true. And I mean, I want to go back to one of the where you mentioned, you know, addiction in your alcohol use had kind of taken something away from you, had stolen something good in your life, and you realize that. What would you say helped you turn a corner with alcohol?
I think the biggest issue was that I didn't realize that it was a coping mechanism for me.
Yeah, I mean, we pulled some stats, and I didn't realize this, that the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism puts the annual number of men dying to alcohol-related causes to 62,000 compared to 26,000 women. It's a much bigger issue for men. Like, I just, you know, thought that that was something we could touch on resources and, what helped you break through there.
Yeah, so I think that the first thing was obviously my friend telling me about therapy. I think the fact that someone close to me did it and was open about it, I think that was like huge. Because I had been talking about going to therapy since my friend Anthony died. Because the person I was dating at the time had mentioned it, like, maybe you should go talk to someone. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. But I never, it was never really an option, because again, like I said, I had already been kind of programmed to not talk about my problems. And so I think that the big thing, just hearing that one person say it to me, was such a big deal, which is why I'm so like passionate about advocating for this now, because I do think that like if any one person is willing to listen to me, then maybe it'll help them out. And so I think that that's the first thing, is like talking about it. And then, I mean, once I started therapy, my therapist actually um, talked to me about joining like this, like a men's empowerment group in which we would talk about learning to manage our emotions. And I think that that's the next thing that really like I benefited from um, greatly, because I think that as men, we're also taught that like the only emotion that you're really allowed to show is like anger, right? Like if something's not going your way, you get angry, and that's it. And like it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be scared, and all of these other emotions that sometimes will communicate what you're feeling a lot better, and will help you kind of like work through a situation, is
It's
much better
so
than
true.
being angry.
It's so true. It's that emotional intelligence factor, I think, that we learn through therapy, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that was the biggest thing, is like I can't tell you how many times I sat in the office with my therapist, and he's like, okay, so here's the situation, like how do you feel? And I just wouldn't know what to say, and he would tell me, you're feeling this way. And I'd be like, no, Charles, like, that's not what I'm feeling. He's like, no, that's what you're feeling. And then I realized, I was like, oh, I've never actually named this emotion. And so that's like the key thing, is like, we don't even know how to identify what we're feeling, because our automatic response is to just be angry.
Mm.
Right. So I think that that was another big turning point with learning to like once I can identify the emotions that I was feeling, I was able to kind of process the feelings, and I didn't need to numb myself so that I could get past this feeling. It was like, oh, I know what I'm feeling. I know why I'm feeling it. And I can actually take actions to not feel this way anymore, so that I don't have to just drink to like numb all these feelings.
Yeah, exactly. It's really powerful when you gain that sense of control over what you're going through. Um, so it's been how many months since we've all been kind of working at home, doing school at home, all that kind of stuff. How have you been doing during this pandemic?
Well, during the 16 years of quarantine.
Yes.
So the funny thing was, I was like really terrified leading into this, because I honestly hate being alone. But I've picked up mindfulness practices. So I do a lot of meditating. I have started to develop a green thumb. I have like so many plants now, and I talk to them, and I like look.
You're a crazy plant guy.
Yeah, I have a sweater that says "Plant Dad."
Oh,
Um,
that's cute.
yeah, but yeah, I think that that's been really helpful. And I mean, the thing about this new like alone time is that I learned that like I don't need to be so busy all the time. Like I'm comfortable with just being with myself now. And so it was just nice to have that kind of like that time to myself. I know that not everyone has had like such a good time. Um, but I do think that I was really lucky to have started therapy before all of this, because I don't know that I would have been this good had that not been the scenario. Um, yeah, I'm really grateful that I had actually gone to therapy and kind of had really been working on myself for some time, because it had been about a year and a few months right when the pandemic started.
So you were probably able to easily shift to telehealth and do virtual, or do you still go in?
So no, I was actually telehealth, and we would go on like Zoom and stuff. But I had actually gotten to the point where like now I only meet my therapist like once a month. It's just more of a check-in, and I think that that's the other thing that people don't realize, is like it doesn't have to be very intense forever. Like for me, I would say like the first like 6 months was once a week, and sometimes I would do like an emergency session, so I'd be like twice a week, but that only lasted for about 3 months, and then it would slowly go to like once every other week. And now like and I mean, now there's times where like my therapist actually just had a baby, so he was like on paternity leave, and I didn't talk to him for like a month and a half, and I just checked in with him to congratulate him, and that was about it. But yeah, no, I mean, now it's more so like I just check in if there's like some dire situation that I kind of want to talk about. But it's a lot easier to kind of just maintain once you've kind of built up the fundamentals, and you have that foundation to work with. And I think that the biggest thing that really has helped me stay solid was I want to say my first or second session, my therapist sat me down and he was like, all right, well, like the problem is you don't really have a vision for your life, right? Like you can't envision a future where you're happy. And so he was like, we're going to work on that. And so he made me do a vision statement, and it was like a Word document. And like I said, like, oh, if he was like, if you had your dream job, like what would it look like? And I started to conceptualize this idea of a youth center, because ever since I was a little kid, I always wanted to be like a part of that, because I remember wanting to go to like the YMCA or like the Boys and Girls Club, and there was like a membership fee, and I couldn't get in because we didn't really have the money. And so I remember when I was sitting down working on this document, I said, I want to do like a youth center, but I want it to be free for everyone. Like if you can't pay for it, then we'll figure out how to get you in for free. And so I started to like build that as like my idea. And then I came up with the concept of like, I want to open up a youth center where I can do like physical and mental wellness, right? Like a combined place where that can happen. And like my goal again is to make it free for anyone who walks in the door. Like if you have if you want to get better, we will help you get there. And then like as I started like going like from that, my therapist was like, all right, well, you got to go to school for that, right? Like if you want to be a therapist, you got to go to school. So you're going to go on this track, and you're going to study therapy, and you're going to do counseling, and you're going to do all these things. And so like that kind of got me on a roll where I could really build momentum. And yeah, I mean, every now and then I'll update my vision statement to have like new things. So like originally it was like go to finish your undergrad degree, and like now I'm in like my final semester, and like I thought it was going to take 2.5 years, and I'm actually graduating in a year and a half. So it was just incredible how like just creating that momentum can like really like change your life in an instant. And like anytime I was during the pandemic, I just remember thinking like, all right, well, what's going to help me get there? Okay, stay focused on school. Cool, do that, right? And so now I'm at the point where like once I finish undergrad, I'm in the process of applying to grad school right now. So then it moves into that next stage. And so another thing that was on my vision board was like get a better relation, like spend more time with your mom, like in a loving way. Like don't just sit in the same room with her, like sit down and actually talk to her. And like I will now randomly sit on the couch with my mom. I'll bring her coffee. We'll sit down, have breakfast, and I'll like tell me a story, right, from like
Oh,
childhood. And it's just like it's amazing. And like one of the really fun things that I've been doing is like I'll set up a mic and I'll just record it, because I know that someday I'm gonna like love listening to this. Um,
that's so cool, David. You basically just described it with your therapist, you were designing your life. Like,
yeah,
I really think it's just so powerful that you can do that in therapy. And I agree with you. I think everyone needs a therapist.
yeah,
It's really powerful.
yeah.
Well, I know you wanted to thank some special people who have helped you along your journey. Can you tell us about those people?
Yeah, so one person I've been referencing a lot is Charles Daniels Jr. He's my therapist. He runs a nonprofit organization in Boston called Fathers Uplift. So anyone who would like to know more about the work that he's doing, like please go on his website. And he's an incredible man. The next person I want to thank is Julio Sorrell, who is my best friend. He is a man who has talked me off many ledges, and I really appreciate everything he's done for me. And Julio, I love you, my brother. I wish you all the best. And I want to give a big shout out to my girlfriend, who has really helped me throughout this entire process. That is Fina Dio Damali Jervis. She's an incredible human being. She actually met me when I was not in the greatest place. And at the time, I know that she looked at me and she thought, like, I'm not touching this. And so like the funny thing is I met her maybe like a couple weeks before I started therapy. And so she has really like seen this transition, and she has really helped me grow. She's been very supportive, from just like, again, also talking me off ledges, like helping me with my college applications, and like helping me with like revising my essays, and like anytime I'm having like a nervous breakdown about, hey, can I get to the finish line, she's just there to give me a pep talk and to tell me like, you got this. So like those three people have been very amazing and a very integral part of my story and my process. And I know that with their support, like all of the dreams that I've come up with are very much within my grasp.
That's so special. And I'm so glad you did those shout outs because it's so true. I mean, we can't do this alone.
Yeah.
And through the work you do in therapy, you can learn to build this supportive network around you. And that's what you've done. And I have to give a plug for BetterHelp because we have an offer through them. We don't get anything out of it. They don't sponsor This Is My Brave, but they give us this offer where you can get a month of free therapy to try them out. And I've recommended it to a number of individuals who've taken advantage of it and have stuck with it. And you just go to betterhelp.com/thisismybrave. And you have to take a survey and, talk about what you're hoping to get out of therapy. But, like you said, if you're honest and you're open, and they then match you up with an appropriate therapist. And like we mentioned earlier, it's like dating. If it's not the right fit, you switch. But there's so many benefits to therapy. And that's why I'm so grateful that you're on with us today to talk about it and share your experience.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, so we want to give a big thank you to David Andrade for joining us today to talk about men's mental health in honor of Movember. Asking for help is not easy, but we do everything we can to make sure that men know it's okay to reach out. There are people just like you out there, and you deserve the support. So if you want more information about the Movember movement, visit www.us.movember.com. And thanks again, David. And for everybody for tuning in, join us next week for our final episode of season 1, discussing grief and coping during the holidays, coping with COVID and all that it's done. So signing off, guys. Have a great night.
Thank you.